Hi everyone, it's Jerry. I have an excellent game to share with you from a historic match between IBM's supercomputer Deep Blue and Garry Kasparov. This was their very first game, and it was played on February 10th, 1996 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it set a record. It was the first time a computer program defeated a world champion in a classical game under tournament regulations, that is, with classical time controls. Let's have a look. E4, C5, Sicilian defense, Alpine Sicilian, the C3 Sicilian. Okay, one of the main replies to the C3 Sicilian is to play D5. Black is saying, I'm okay. Bringing out the queen early. I don't have to worry about knight C3 now that you have a pawn on C3. D4. King knights are out. How is Black treating this Alpine variation? He's going with the pin. How's this dealt with? First, the breaking of the pin, and then this bishop is given a kick. White gains just a little bit by flicking that one in. More long term, it's nice to have the flight square for our king, once castled. From here, castles, knight c6, and once this guy is on e3, and there is this increased pressure on c5, that's when Black releases the tension, takes on d4, and White takes on the isolated pawn, recaptures with the pawn. Now, in preparing for this video, one of the lines I wanted to have a look at is, I questioned whether it was necessary for Black to release the tension. It's not. But you do have to be careful. This is another move that Black could consider here. Not with the intention to meet pawn takes pawn with bishop takes pawn, because that would be losing a piece. Queen takes queen, and then bishop takes bishop. However, Black could follow with queen takes queen, and then look to bother this bishop from its defensive c5. Some of the lines from here get very messy. My point, Black has options after bishop to e3. In this game, it's c takes d4 straight away, c takes d4. Now this is opened. The tempo against the queen is nearby. Bishop b4. a3. Both bishops have been deployed to similar spots here for Black. Both have been kicked back. And now I thought the idea with this bishop deployment by Black to b4 was to chop the knight as soon as it goes to c3. So much for that. The queen simply reacts. So what is the idea that Black has? The bishop is looking to reroute to b6 to create more pressure against the isolated pawn. Okay, from here, knight b5. Black now has to be very careful where to go exactly with the queen. In the game, it's queen e7. It's important for Black to stay out of reach of this knight. If this guy is allowed to get to e5 and generate a threat against the queen, that's going to be problematic for Black. As an example, here's a line you don't want to have to play as Black. Knight e5, takes, and now if you take this knight, there's going to be a big problem on d6. So knight takes, pawn takes, the knight is hit, and then you're going to go uncastled. So you don't want to, in short, have to take the knight when it gets to e5. Having to deal with the pawn on d6, scaring away the knight on f6, and creating a support point on d6 is way too much for Black to handle. So again, it's best to stay out of reach of this king knight. From here, knight e5 still goes, just not as forcefully. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, castles, and rook a to c1. So these are the two files to put the rooks. Which one do you go with first? Queen rook belongs on c1, the king rook belongs on d1. This is the one that gives direction to Black. a threat is now present on c6. It's defended, rook a to c8. And now bishop to g5. So this valuable tempo earlier, knight b5, hitting the queen, is making this second step with the bishop possible. Went to e3, now it's being redeployed on this diagonal. The knight is pinned. The knight on b5 is defending d4. How's black going to deal with that? He goes with b6, completing this journey with the bishop. It now pinpoints d4. This is where black starts to go a bit wrong. The computer is suggesting that a6 is best to immediately drive the knight back, or at least try to kick this knight back very soon. Best continuation from here is to first flick in this capture if a6. Note that black is not in a position to recapture with the queen. There would be a fork on d7. So black would have to take with the pawn. And after knight takes, rook takes, it says go back here. That's considered one of the best continuations. In this game, however, the bishop goes to b6. And now comes bishop takes knight. You still can't take with the queen because of the fork on d7. Pawn takes bishop. And now knight to c4. So maybe black in this position was thinking that the knight would have to go back to f3 to defend this point directly. But white has indirect defense of d4 now that this king is more exposed. There is, after all, a open file. There's no g-pawn. There's some checks here. White's reply is to go to c4, looking to track down this bishop, looking to, in a way, create a hole for this knight on b5. Once this captures in, and if these guys end up doubled, there is no a-pawn, there is no a6. So, in the game we have rook f to d8. I said this is indirectly defended. How so? If you take with the knight or bishop, it's not going to matter. This is how white would win the piece. Check. There goes the bishop. Indirect defense of d4. So black throws a third piece on it. By this point, white's able to swipe the bishop and create another structural defect in black's camp. And this guy is now stable. From here, rook f to d1, last piece involved. f5 cuts out any check and also opens up a new square for the queen. Queen e3, queen f6, the new square that was opened up with f5. And now we have a key move in this game, d5. At the end of the video, I'll share more about this pawn break. I'll actually just go ahead and quote Garry about this move towards the very end. It's very instructive what he has to say about this advance. Let's see how this plays out. Rook takes pawn, rook takes rook, pawn takes rook, in b3. So you could capture on b6, but that would not be a good idea because black would get this pawn right back. And that would not be an even trade of pawns because this guy right here is really just a half point pawn since it's doubled and isolated. And this is a full point pawn. So white saves the healthier pawn. And now this is nearby. From here, king h8, getting ready to make use of this half-open g-file. Notice, instead of king h8, if black tries d4, white could simply take. There is, after all, this pin against the knight. Okay, so in the game it's king h8. Queen takes b6 only now. Rook g8. Queen c5. If you try some other move, like grabbing another pawn, black's going to be winning. Queen g5 would win the game. Double attack. Rook and mate. You cannot defend both. Okay. So it's queen c5. The queen is coming to the rescue, looking to take on d5 and defend g2. So that would be a good follow-up in the event of queen g6 or queen g7. Considered best in this position is queen to g5. Pressure here, it's not, well, it is defended in this case with the queen on c5 rather than b7. So there's just this one threat, but this was considered the best line to, in fact, go for the mate in one threat. And some line with g3, f4, and then knight to d6. So I think maybe this was a reason, maybe one of the reasons black didn't go for this idea of a mate threat on g2. It does leave f7 extra sensitive. White has a serious fork threat all of a sudden. So no queen g5 in this game. Instead, d4, knight d6, f4, knight takes pawn. We're ready to take the knight and defend. The knight gets out of the way. It looks a bit scary here. There are these two connected passed pawns, but they're a long ways away. There's this guy who's 3 steps away, a battering ram possibly with f3. Aggressive pieces and pawns black has. This guy is also poison, discovered checks. Okay. From here, queen d5, accurate defense is required by white, and it is, of course, found, this defense. From here, f3, g3, and now in the game we have knight to d3. I have a pop quiz for you, and that is, what would you play as white if black went with queen f4? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video. There's only one winning move. Can you spot it? Feel free to pause the video. Okay. The best move is rook to c8. So one of the things you can be looking for in situations like this, you're playing as white, you see that this pawn is pinned. We would like to take the queen. Can we play a move like queen takes rook? Can we knock that pinning piece out? Well, we can't jump a pawn. But we could say, yeah, let's pin the pinning piece. That's maybe another thing you could look into. So that's a really fancy continuation, really fancy move there. The idea is to prevent this sacrifice on g3. That was a serious threat by black in this position. And rook c8 is a perfect way to defend against that. Okay. Rook takes rook, we would take the queen. All right. In this game, knight d3 is played. Rook c7, same story if queen f4 is played in this position. Rook c8. From here, it's rook e8, knight d6. This guy is definitely in the crosshairs. 3 pieces on it. Black now goes all in with the check, king h2, knight takes f2. These 3 alone are ready to weave the mate. Rook h1, game over. White must be timely, and of course is, capturing on f7 with check. In the game, king g7 is played. What other options are there? Let's look at the worst one. King g8 would result in a mate in 2. Knight h6, double check, and then queen g8 mate. If queen takes knight, we can't take the queen because we'd be getting mated. So how would white reply? There's only one winning continuation, and that would be to give this check. The rook is on the 7th. Let's get the other major piece on the 8th. What are the options here for black? Let's look at them. King g7, we would now be able to take the queen because it's with check, and then we could land this fork against the king and pawn. King g7, swiping the pawn stops the mate threat. Rook h1 is now met with king g2. Some other continuation at this stage after the knight check. Queen takes here. If the rook blocks, well, we no longer have to worry about the mate threat. And we could parry this threat against our queen first by giving this check, winning a pawn with check, and next winning the queen. And the last moves to look at are the queen blocks. Okay, well, the simplest one, you go to f8, it's mate 1. And if you go to one of these two, you give up control of f6, and it will be a mate in 2 with queen f6, queen g7, game over. So we got all the lines covered there in the game. It's king g7, walking into the discovered check. King h6 is played. If you're going to g6, there's a check on g8. I'll be highlighting a variation shortly with queen g8. In this game, it's king h6, and now rook takes h7. That's the final move of this one. Black resigns. If the game continued, king g6, we can sweep into g8, and it may be tempting to view this position as white and think, oh, how am I supposed to win the queen, or what's the mate threat? Well, you don't have to go for those two things. You could look to simply parry the mate in 1 threat by black, and when you do that, you buy yourself more time to go hunting for the queen or king. White would have a move like knight takes pawn in this position. No more mate, and many threats now for black to parry. Knight takes rook, the pin and win of the queen, or simply going hunting for the king. No solution here for black. So, I want to go back to this key moment and share with you this quote by Garry, and that is, at this point right here, move 23, this pawn sacrifice right here, move 23, d5. So this is what he had to say about this 23rd move. He said, quote, "If I had been playing white, I might have offered this pawn sacrifice. It fractured black's pawn structure and opened up the board. Although there did not appear to be a forced line of play that would allow recovery of the pawn, my instincts told me that with so many loose black pawns and a somewhat exposed black king, white could probably recover the material with a better overall position to boot." So, I hope you enjoyed this quote from one of the greatest minds of the game. There were points that stuck out to me about it. His phrase, "There did not appear to be a forced line of play," as well as "my instincts told me," and his use of the term "probably." It does give us a nice window into his intuitive thinking about this key position of a historic game. Anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe took a thing or two away. That's all for now. Take care.